So we now have Pete Dilly, who's going to take us through COP26 and to try to bring some sense to the disorder. Pete, the floor is all yours. Pete, you're on mute.
And exploded. Yes, right. Thanks very much for asking me to come bring some sense to the insanity. It's I've learned a lot in the process. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of commentary. Everyone's got their opinions. Right, I get the slides going, but I was just thinking. So yeah, how to cut through? How do we cut through all the nonsense and get straight to the point? But let's stick to the script. Share screen. Share screen.
Can you find it? Bottom middle. That's it.
Share screen.
Yeah.
There we go. And that's my raw slide set. I guess I hit play. I should have tried that. Slide.
Normally, there's a little picture of a. Well, this will just about work as long as you don't have animations. Oh, what about present? You've got to present top right.
Aha!
Try that.
Professionals in the house.
There you go.
That. Okay. All right. I'm Pete. I've been with XR since right at the beginning. I'm a coordinator for XR in Swindon, and I've done stuff with XR Japan, and I try and keep abreast of stuff. But there's a fire hose of information coming out about COP. COP26, the Conference of the Parties 26th meeting, attended by a wide range of people, but it's quite interesting those folks who didn't make the invitation. So Russia, China, plenty of sponsors. It's been interesting hearing, tuned into the Sky and hearing them lament that BP wasn't invited. So there has been some effort to clear up, to clean up the act a little bit and not be quite so blatant with the greenwash. Greenwash being painting things in a green friendly way whilst continuing to pollute as usual. Wouldn't be an XR related talk if it didn't bring this old chestnut up. There have been a lot of COP talks. Well, there have been 26 of them. And it has almost made, in fact, it hasn't made a single dent in the upward trend of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so it does, you know, thinking about this talk straight off is it even, you know, is it even, how much to go into it? Is COP part of the problem? And, you know, jury's still out on that. You've got a lot of lobbyists. You had David Attenborough. Who else did we have? We didn't have on the outside, didn't get invited to the table was Greta, or Vanessa, or Aoi, who were left with the activists outside. There were according to the plans, to be 500 armed Scottish police, joined with at least 500 other Scottish police, and this will play. This was this afternoon outside Glasgow Central train station. A bit of kettling action going on, completely unnecessary. So I think tension's a little bit high there. Absolutely. Oh, billionaires, they're able to come. That's no problem. And so break the first rule of you know, of nonsense. If you're pledging something in the billions, you're not making any serious contribution when this COP is supposed to be about global solutions. You know, so $1 billion, I think it has to be said to more kind of $1 billion kind of style towards protecting nature from this guy. Make of that what you will. The UK approach has been, according to what we found, a 2050 deadline for net zero to adapt to protect communities and natural habitats, to mobilize finance, and work together to deliver. I'm not quite sure what that meant, but yes. So currently, though, the UK is set to not to meet its legal obligations as far as emissions cuts. So I think there's going to have to be a shift on the British side as far as their commitments go. But again, how you can tell the nonsense is if you're pledging to start moving in the right direction over the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, this is greenwash. This isn't a commitment. But here it is in the chart properly. We are totally, absolutely nowhere meeting our Paris commitments. This I believe is the collective pledges for the international community and where it's likely to take us. So okay, 59 countries representing over half of global greenhouse gas emissions have communicated net zero emissions targets, including the world's two largest emitters, the United States and China. So there's also another bit of what nonsense you might hear about would be industrialized nations talking about current emissions rates and overlooking conveniently historical emissions rates. If you take the UK versus China as an example, we are emitting more per capita as far as historical emissions go. So there's all kinds of sleight of hand and clever accounting going on, which are going to see richer countries wrangle out of their obligations to make meaningful cuts. So there's a 60% emissions gap between what's promised and what needs to be delivered. So here it is again, stark in stark colours here. Yeah. Our current policies are not adequate for taking us down below 1.5 degrees. And there has to be something fundamental, a massively fundamental shift to take us down to that. And there hasn't been anything that comes close to hitting that. So, you know, it's still early days, you could say, we're just a few days in, but things aren't looking too great. So we noticed a kind of, started out as a split between two approaches. I was reading James Lovelock's analysis. He's, as you know, the guy who first was asked by NASA to prove whether there was life on Mars, and he took the analysis a step further and looked at how you could tell whether there'd be life on Earth, spotted that the atmosphere is out of balance. There's all this very corrosive oxygen in the atmosphere, and that led to him to discovering the biofeedbacks that maintain a stable climate on our planet. And we've, as far as the climate goes, have kind of split off those feedback mechanisms, the natural side of the environment, so you call that nature, and we focus more on the planet as a machine, and just using the greenhouse effect as the measure, the be all and end all, as far as how progress is made or not on the climate. We've radically changed the composition of our atmosphere, but also we've radically reduced the areas of land which is wilderness or nature, and we've radically shifted the balance of what animals are actually living on the planet, and it's mostly us and our food. So therein is the other fundamental bit, which it's just behind the scenes, but there's a racism to climate change. It's there right from the very beginning. The banks which fund this industry, they're all their historical feet in the slave trade. You've got indigenous people who are defending the very last bits of biodiversity on the planet. They're being killed at hundreds a year for defending their land, and with it defending the last bits of the system which regulates the atmosphere and the very planet that we live on. There needs to be money for indigenous peoples. You need to look out for commitments on that side, because they're the most vulnerable, but the most pivotal on this. Who else didn't make it? Vladimir didn't make it. And you could say this is just a joking comment. I found that he says that Russians would spend less money on fur coats and the grain harvest would go up. But yes, there is that on paper, the idea that perhaps Siberia would become more hospitable and would accommodate the world's population. Maybe climate refugees would come in and Russia would be able to provide for them. It's not holding up to reality. So if that is part of someone's plan, they need to revise that quickly. The reality is there's huge amounts of carbon and worse still methane trapped underground, which is coming out in forests and these great big methane eruptions. So Russia needs to start becoming part of the solution on that. This is an Italian newspaper having a dig at the Australians and their cavalier approach to the climate. Again, it's the cuts that have to be made are going to be massive, and we're not seeing that. China on this side, this is an action that XR did outside the Chinese embassy the other day. I guess kind of because we get this a lot of put under pressure to why didn't you go and protest against China? So we did. And here is the fact that if you take into account our historical emissions and a per capita allocation of emissions, that UK per capita emissions are 19 times greater than that of China. And we've been benefiting from a rather convenient benefit of outsourcing our manufacturing industry to China, is the fact that that's reduced our emissions on our soil, but it's still very much our responsibility. Right, so the UK, they've talked a lot about hydrogen. Now, you have to be really careful when you're talking about hydrogen, because there's only one way of creating hydrogen that is actually emissions free as far as the actual manufacturing process, and that's electrolysis of water. By passing electricity through it, you split the hydrogen and the oxygen part, and then reversing the process, boom, you burn hydrogen in oxygen and you get water out. But there's some clever accounting going on with hydrogen, and that makes this an incredibly risky and open to corruption fuel of the future. Anything which uses fossil fuels as an input is going to have to start ringing alarm bells. But the big problem is that the natural gas infrastructure leaks. Something like 15% of the equivalent of 15% of the natural gas that gets harvested escapes into the atmosphere. And methane is 130 times more potent a greenhouse gas than than carbon dioxide, even though it doesn't last as long in the atmosphere. So yeah, be careful when getting enthusiastic about hydrogen, because there's only one way of doing it properly, and it's very much open to, it leaves the door open for fossil fuels to claim to be part of the solution and still have a future. The plus side on cutting methane, though, is that it can get us a quick head start on cutting the heating that's being experienced in the atmosphere, because it's that much more potent than carbon dioxide. Oh, there's Joe, and the US. So I just put that in there. It's sadly reminiscent of the currently we're seeing watered down promises from the US about climate, very much reminiscent of the 2008 financial crash aftermath that saw Barack Obama voted into office promising to regulate the Wall Street bad practices, which brought the planet to financial meltdown, and then backed away from it. There's a lot of parallels there, but we'll move on. I've included this graph because it's very much, it comes up a lot. It's one of the go-to yeah but type arguments that come up when discussing climate with focus. Yeah, but what about population? And it's true, world population has gone up, but if you want to look at what about population and who's emitting carbon dioxide, then you're talking just under half of the carbon dioxide emissions are by the richest 10% of the world population, and that's basically us here in the developed world. And the poorest 50% are responsible for only 10% of total lifestyle consumption emissions. It's very important that we that narrative around population doesn't go down the eco-fascist route, as large population crashes are often caused by war and genocide, and the risk is that we're going to get discussion talk that is condoning war rather than seeing war as part of the problem. Oh, right, how am I doing? Looks like I've gotten through the first half of my talk. I think here's probably a good point. If I stop gabbling a little bit and listen to some questions.
Pete, if you stop sharing, then we can see people's faces. That's it. And I'll just...
I just noticed I've got this thing in the way.
There you go. So you're happy to take 5 minutes of questions now, Pete, and then give us a 2-minute break to stretch our legs. Is that the idea?
Good plan.
Great. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, free for all. Anyone, you can take yourselves off mute. You can put your hand up either electronically or just stick it up so that I can see you.
Oh,
go ahead, Helen. You're on mute. Yep.
Do you think that the global south will get an opportunity to actually put their point of view, in view of the fact that Jeff Bezos is talking, but people like the activists are not talking?
Yeah, very much so. Thinking about the delegates to start with, you've got massive entourages of, dare I say it, lackeys and holders and busybodies and hangers-on and folk with the developed nations delegation. And then you've got poor countries that could just about manage to send 1 or 2 people to argue their case for continued existence. So you're talking about people in low-lying Polynesian islands that face almost imminent submersion, and therefore being government in exile, like that has happened in some cases. So no, you're not getting proper representation. And yes, important activists like Greta and Vanessa aren't getting to put across the voice of the youth over. So yeah, a little bit of bias there.
Can I possibly, Pete, ask your view on one thing? My sister-in-law, just before COP26, she said, okay, if there was one thing that was really important to you, in terms of what COP26 is going to bring, what would it be? And without hesitation, really, I said, well, if only they would come close to meeting their Paris obligations of 100 billion in terms of support for those developing countries, then that would be a start. And that's immediate, because clearly when you're starting to say, we'll do this by 2040, you're basically kicking things into long grass to make it into someone else's problem, like Australia has done. So the immediate thing is, tomorrow, let's meet the 100 billion. But I was very impressed by Narendra Modi, who actually came up and said in his speech on Monday, he said, no, it shouldn't be 100 billion, it should be 100 trillion per year for the developing world. And I realized, that my target was much too low, of expecting 100 billion, and the world's target is much too low. So, because I now realize that he's absolutely right. But go ahead, comment.
Yeah. So that's the rule of thumb that I've been looking at is if the figure is in the billions, then it's not significant, and it isn't going to be enough to address the problem. So yeah, you could say across several years, the 100 billion a year each year. That's significant. Of course, folk haven't lived up to it. We have to understand the historical background on where we are with the climate, and it goes right back to massive looting of natural resources from the global south. So we've accumulated riches from you name it: coal, oil, gas, uranium, rubber, all the minerals, all of that. We've dragged that up there on the back of slave labor. We've built and developed our capitalist little rat races, and the other thing which I didn't put in, but it's got it again. The history of climate change is much older than 100 years. The first inklings go back into the 19th century about the fact that the world couldn't have been like this all the time and still make sense how we observe it at the moment. So that led folk to go off and do expeditions and find out how the continents have moved, and how the temperature must have been different. And greenhouse gases as a mechanism for changing global temperature was worked out at the before the beginning of the 19th century. You've got you'll see it floating around. We like to circulate this stuff on on the online. You'll see there's a journal in New Zealand, a New Zealand journal, an article about how if we continue. This was 1914, warning against catastrophic climate change and global heating back then. So what the revelations that come out of folk doing their diligent work is that fossil fuel companies went beyond just anecdotal and by the by information about climate change to actually hiring and doing very systematic and very accurate climate science research themselves. And they were on the money as far as what would happen if we continued our emissions very close to spot on to where we are now, about how the temperature has increased. And the reason for doing that was mainly so that fossil fuel companies could continue to operate unheeded. They can adapt to the changing climate, rather than, you would imagine, rather than realizing this is a bad thing and putting an end to it. That led to a disinformation campaign that came up very early. So this is the work of psychologists. Psychologists said that you don't have to deny it, you just have to sow doubt. And so the sowing doubt industry got started. The tobacco lobby hired the same folks who used to work that would work in the climate doubt industry. And when the link to cancer from smoking was discovered later, then they adopted the same approach in order to protect profits for tobacco. But it was by far a long way earlier the fossil fuel industry got started. So that's what we're up against. We're up against a system that knew this was happening and got their ducks in a row, got their pieces on the board in place very, very early, before anyone else really started taking this seriously. Then you've got the beginning of the COP process, the international community starting to take heed, but there hasn't been anything like the response to the threat that was. So when CFCs were identified as causing the hole in the ozone layer, there was the Montreal Treaty. That was in short thrift, very quickly. Let's stop these emissions of these gases, save the ozone layer. Big campaign. It was implemented. Government stuck to it. We've seen the hole close. Lots of lives saved. That's the scientific community and the international community acting as responsible actors. But there isn't that much money in CFC gases, so there wasn't any resistance to the process. There's a lot of money in oil, and there's a lot of money in beef, and there's a lot of money in war.
Too right. Yeah, brings us back to the arms trade.
Any other questions, or are we allowed to take a quick break? Jenny?
Yes, I'd like to come back to the position regarding Russia and China, particularly China. I understand that they haven't got their top people at the COP talks, but I did think that China, at any rate, had, if you like, lower ranking officials taking part. Is that not right? Have I misheard that?
Sorry, lower ranking?
Well, not the Premier, not Chao Jinping or whatever his name is, but other officials from China representing China at COP26. Is that, no? I've missed that somewhere.
I will find out during the break and get back to it.
Well, I think it I don't know how you describe it if they don't send anybody to such an important organisation, especially when they themselves are doing.
No, Jenny, on the news, they were actually showing us Chinese negotiators, and then they also showed us the person who was the chief negotiator for China. Right. So I'm assuming that they've actually sent quite a significant delegation. I can't imagine why they wouldn't.
No, that was.
It was just Xi Jinping who decided he wouldn't go, and he's also not gone to lots of other things. So it's not as if he's actually decided to boycott just this.
No,
he has actually made a conscious effort not to go to things, and he's given a reason. He's given COVID as the reason. So yeah.
Oh yes, that's what I heard. There was just a very brief mention on Radio 4 that I caught. I don't know about Russia though. Presumably they're in the same sort of situation, that they've sent some officials there. Do you know anything about Russia?
No.
I know that they haven't sent anybody.
But I'm going to make a little point here, because I'm sure many of us saw Earthshot and were incredibly impressed. And one of the features that they made a huge, great song and dance about, quite rightly, is that no one came from lots of different countries, everything was done virtually. So they had fantastic technology with people from the US being interviewed, etc., and they hadn't flown across. So this is in contrast to COP26, where we've got 27,000 delegates, and of course all this business about private planes and all the rest of it. So actually, I don't mind too much if some of these planes haven't flown to COP26. Yeah, I think we need to just throw that into the mix.
Mm.
And talking of Earthshot, I seem to remember that there was an award to, I think it was Thailand, for splitting hydrogen in a green way.
Yeah, that's
so it
exactly
is
right.
possible to do that.
That's exactly right, and they won their particular category.
Yes.
So that is a modular, very portable hydrogen electrolysis plant, and it genuinely could be a bit of a game changer, because you could then, for example, have a bothy in the middle of a field, whatever it is, using solar power, but it needs hydrogen for some things, because you can't necessarily use the solar power for everything. So therefore, you are now becoming slightly more self-contained. But so I was very, very impressed by that particular invention, if you like, and I think it's definitely got legs.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, Pete. Sorry, you probably want to add something to that.
The only thing I would add about China at the moment is China is just in the news about is kind of mentioning stockpiling to its citizens because of, well, there's been a massive amount of crop damage done to wheat crop because of massive rain and typhoon have ripped through large parts of the country. So China is very much aware of the risks of climate change. So yeah, and that combined with the fact that it's a new emitter, but it's not a historic emitter. I only hope that that the rest of the world can stop using that as an excuse not to show some leadership and show some leadership.
Yeah. Okay, Pete, shall we take a 2-minute break? Right, thanks everyone. See you in 2 minutes.
Right. Cup of tea. Well, why not? Yeah. Well, yes, do that then. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Pete. I'll just switch off the recording briefly and then remind me to switch it on again.
Here's the last bit. It's very thoroughly researched, and no, it's hand wavy. So let's get the slides up. I'm learning. Okay, yeah, we mentioned the capitalism word, and I think it really helps when folks start realizing that you know, well, let's go into it. Here we go. Right, no, that's not it. Where are we? Degrowth is possible. We'll come to there, because I think that's currently what I'm thinking about at the moment. So what we have is a system of infinite growth, a mindset that is instilled in our very essential thinking about what money is, what business is, what the economy is, and that's growth. and we worry about recessions, and we applaud growth, and it's a mindset. It's so fundamental that we don't stop and question the reality of it, but continuing to grow and continuing to grow, you reach hard limits, and those hard limits are not in economic theory. They're known as externalities. They're things which you don't have to worry about. You don't have to worry about cleaning up the river. You don't have to worry about the floods caused by deforestation, because civil society will take care of that. All you have to worry about is what you buy with the profits. So there's a, for the first time, I found some kind of way beyond the growth mindset, and that isn't on a topic which I get very enthusiastic about, which is known as modern monetary theory. Let's stick with that one. So basically, in a nutshell, it's a macroeconomic framework that means that if you have your own currency, like the yen, and you are able to issue that currency, you are not able to run out of that currency. It seems so obvious, but whenever there's a budget, the finance ministers are always at pains to say how they're going to pay for public spending. They're always at pains to say that they're going to keep a responsible lid on borrowing. And the lie therein is that the finances of a sovereign nation are the same as the finances of a house, that you cannot spend what you haven't earned, and you shouldn't borrow because it's costly. And the problem with that is that it ignores the fact that countries are not houses. They can issue their own money. They do not need to collect gold coins, like the Sheriff of Nottingham and days gone by, and take that off to King John, and then from that he can pay his lords and noblemen. We've moved beyond gold as a means of paying for things. We have a far more nebulous concept, that is money in its purest form. So I normally get off and start on a thread about MMT when folks start talking about the National Health Service and how, well, we don't have money for the National Health Service. This might be good. I wonder if that works. Let's turn the sound off. So what folk don't realise, and it's a tragic insight when you gain it, that the National Health Service could be fully funded at any moment. Like, look at a clock, see the second hand tick by. Any second that goes by, you could fully fund the National Health Service, and it wouldn't cause runaway inflation, which is the knee-jerk reaction to people printing money, because the money would be going into paying for services and for equipment and paying wages, which would stay in the economy, go around. It would act as a financial stimulus. There's the big lie about the National Health Service, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that to being able to pay for a Green New Deal of any sort, something which requires money, for example, to pay for the loft insulation and for that to be fitted. So that could be made to happen with a single keystroke as well. Let's find my notes. It isn't intuitive, and I could do with perhaps setting this as an exercise to the viewer to have a plow through some of the some of the work on it. They probably do a better job of explaining it than I can. But the bottom line therein is that the money for a green transition is available at any time. But what was interesting was seeing a link made between making essentially the capitalist system that we're in at the moment works by the exact opposite process. It works by restricting money and access of money for people, which forces them to go out and work in all kinds of horrendous conditions, which they wouldn't possibly choose to do so if it wasn't for the fact that the wolf is at the door. Here we go, right, here it is. So modern monetary theory, the magic money tree, raises a question. If governments can create and spend money so easily then, why have they for so long told us otherwise? Well, according to MMT economists, the narrative of fiscal responsibility is a ruse. It is intended in large part to prevent people from demanding that governments provide job guarantees and universal public services. Remember, governments are happy to create money when it comes to financing wars and pumping up asset values, but when it comes to paying for public services, they say it's not possible. They do the money's not available for that. Why would governments do such a thing? Because if people had access to a public job guarantee doing socially useful work, and if they have access to high quality universal services, then why on earth would they ever agree to do socially unnecessary, meaningless or degrading labor for private firms if the goal of such firms is primarily to accumulate profit for the holders of capital? They wouldn't. In other words, governments have to maintain an artificial scarcity of money in order to ensure a steady flow of cheap labor for private firms. As I argue in Less is More, capitalism seeks to sabotage public abundance in order to generate private riches. This leaves us with an interesting point. Modern monetary theory proposals align elegantly with one of degrowth's key observations, namely that if growthism depends on the perpetual creation of artificial scarcity, then by reversing artificial scarcity, by providing public abundance, we can dismantle the growth imperative. As Georgius Callis has put it, capitalism cannot survive under conditions of abundance. MMT provides an opportunity for us to create a post-growth, post-capitalist economy. Well, that was a revelation, I can tell you. So that links something I did have a slow grasp on and kind of fits onto a problem that we have to face, which is we've got to stop growing, we've got to start degrowing. But this seemed just like theory until this comes along, the anti-work. This is a Reddit thread. We are facing the Great Resignation. It's a social phenomenon that's very new, like in the last few months. That's come out of the pandemic. That's come out of the fact that people have been furloughed from their work and have spent time reflecting on things at home and have decided in very large numbers not to play the game anymore. So seeking to change work and change their situations by resigning in very large numbers. So we're starting to see a pressure on employers to provide better remuneration, better working conditions, because this is starting to generate a scarcity of labor and starting to impact on growth. So I thought I threw that little nugget out there. There are other things I wanted to go through, but well, I think the other thing which picks up on this, which was originally going to be our ending, was the case of New Zealand. In the summer of 2019, New Zealand ditched growth domestic product in favor of the happiness and well-being indicator, where well-being was prioritized in their budget. So that's great. And it's noticeable to look at the difference in the way that New Zealand handled the response to the pandemic in contrast to those who focus on GDP alone. So all very good. Then there is the myth that has to be upheld at all costs, and all political parties seem to uphold this myth, which is that the budget has to be balanced. So the economists have come along, industries come along, and later on, so earlier this year, when Robertson, I guess he's New Zealand's finance minister, gives his budget speech, there's no mention of the living standards framework, which some commentators would hoped would transform the country's approach to budgeting. Instead, the minister emphasized the Labour government's commitment to careful fiscal management and reducing debt. So you're seeing there a pushback against what could be a way into degrowth. So the only way that this is going to ever actually happen is that there's going to have to political parties are going to have to come clean about what they know about the way that the economy really works. And it is, I suppose you could look at some of the incentives that some of the initiatives that Jeremy Corbyn was proposing, for example, universally accessible free broadband, for example, would be an MMT type initiative. So that it is possible, but there's a lot of resistance to this. That the system demands that money is scarce for ordinary people. If you're wanting to make a test and trace app, well, then there's billions available. But yeah, so there's that. Now the slides are all over the shop. Here are the protesters that couldn't make it.
Pete, are you showing your slides? Do you want to share your screen?
Oh, am I not? Oh, all of that would have been a little bit more interesting with the screen showing up, but there we go. Much better faces to be looking at. I've met Aoi. I was supporting her action in Chinatown during the last rebellion in the centre of London, in Chinatown there, and her family died. Large numbers of her family died, drowned in the subway during the last serious floods that were there, and she's just 16, and that is just really, it's heartbreaking to imagine, or to be talking to somebody that young who's lost their family completely, and then on top of that had to flee the country because protesting against climate change, or anything for that matter, is not welcome. So she was being harassed, she was being arrested, and she fled out. She fled over here, and did a very effective job of engaging with the Chinese population in Chinatown. And there are the other activists that are, so I take it that's Vanessa on the left from Uganda. So my slides are all over the shop. Who also didn't make it. This is the climate change movement's only political prisoner. This is James Brown, who I've also had the privilege of meeting on several occasions. A Paralympian who glued himself to the top of a passenger airplane and brought it to a halt for 2 hours. He was sentenced to 12 months in Wandsworth prison, and he'd welcome a nice letter, I'm sure, or a card. So he's not able to attend, and there's a massive silence in the in the media about climate change activists being kept as a political prisoner by the leader of the COP26, the leading nation. That's very telling. Okay, here's another country that's introduced a well-being measurement over GDP, and that's Bhutan. So yeah, so yeah, those are things to think about. There is a way through. There's a sound economic principle which can be brought into play. Usually it's brought into play at times of war. We need to be using this economic mechanism for the benefit of maintaining the peace. And I'll leave that thought floating.
Thank you very much, Pete. Yeah, so clearly a lot of subjects that you're very passionate about. Can I start with a question? The modern monetary theory that you've now been, how long have you been looking at this? When did the penny drop?
Yeah, I do campaign work for the Keep Our NHS Public organization as well, and it came out of that. It's depressing. It's really depressing when there's budget cuts announced. I suppose the real time that I started taking it seriously is thanks to Theresa May, who told a young nurse she can't have a pay rise of any sort because, well, there's no magic money tree. So I looked into it. What MMT, magic money tree, it's a shorthand. She would have been briefed on MMT when she took office as Prime Minister.
Okay. And do you see it primarily as a mechanism for degrowth or for investment in the right things? In other words, yeah, clearly you mentioned National Health Service as an example, but are you also thinking, and you mentioned also loft insulation. Obviously, you could say, yes, there is a magic money tree, actually, the MMT and so on and so forth, get all those lofts insulated. Or do you feel that it's a bit of all of those things?
Oh yeah, so yeah, not just for services, but yeah, for actual things like loft insulation. Yeah, absolutely. Because as far as the money's concerned, the money's still there. It's changed hands. It's gone to suppliers who sourced this from elsewhere. It knocks on it follows through. So yeah, it just comes from the fact that there's the ability to issue currency. The way where it breaks down, of course, is where if currency is leaving the shores, as it were. If this money starts going into offshore bank accounts, like I'm quite sure the money for the Test and Trace app has, and lots of these fraudulent PPE contracts that the government has awarded to landlords and friends of the party, that money has made its way offshore, and that will be causing inflation. But if we're talking about using this domestically for paying folk here, so yeah, that would work.
Okay. So we're opening the floor to questions. By all means, take yourselves off mute. So, Pete, are there particular economists, leading economists, that are also supportive of the MMT?
Yep. I'll put some resources out on that. There are whole communities of this. There's movement in the Democrat Party in the States for pushing this to the fore.
Okay, well, I'll ask the question in a slightly different way. Today was the finance day at COP26.
Oh yes.
Do you think that anyone mentioned MMT?
No, of course not. No, not at all. What was mentioned was significant amounts of money. On the other hand, also the fact that the way that, so it's not the interesting thing is, so there's a lot of good. There was a lot of good words coming from the finance sector, and I was personally surprised that the large parts of the finance sector are very switched on to the threats of climate change, what's driving it, the need to invest in nature. That was quite remarkable, actually. So, and the amount of money that's being talked about investing in mitigating climate change. I think the figure is something like 130 trillion dollars. So okay, you can take that seriously. So something like 1/5 of the total finance industry's money is being leveraged at the moment. So this isn't even without carbon, a price on carbon, but just on mitigation. I think that would have that's come about because of massive increase in awareness about the climate. I think that's something that the climate activists have got to take some credit for. It's not, you don't always immediately get feedback on things that you've done, like blocking streets in the City of London, but you do see curtains twitching, you do see folk looking out and probably asking some questions and looking at this. Britain's got a very important leading role to play in this, insofar as it is responsible. It funnels through nearly half of all the offshore money. The some folk call it dark money, but tax evaded money. We were talking huge amounts of. We were talking hundreds of trillions of dollars pass through the City of London every year. So, that would be good to bring in as taxes. Taxes, you know, as I say, don't actually pay for goods and services that a nation needs, but it does regulate the system. There's an important role that the City of London has got to play on that. So XR are on the case as far as that goes. We spent a lot of time in our last rebellion in the City of London trying to highlight the role of British financial institutions in the climate emergency. So
other questions, Phil? You've got a question. Go ahead.
In summary, Pete, I think you're comparing the COP meeting with people for rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Would you like to comment on that comment?
COP26 is rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's drama, it's razzmatazz, it's fizz and it's bubble, and it's chance for Boris Johnson to talk the talk, almost talk the talk. So, would you like some other good news, perhaps something that could come out of this? If my memory was better, I would have included it in my previous bit. So, what could happen? And thanks to George Monbiot for bringing that to our attention. Is it's not on here. Something which goes against what I said earlier, that if you're talking about figures in their billions, then it's not significant. I was wrong. For the measly sum of less than $200 billion, you could buy and decommission every single gas-fired power station on the planet.
Right.
And it would take a few months to do it.
That's good.
Helen, you had a question.
Well, it wasn't actually a question, but I did come across, when we were talking about razzmatazz and stuff, a sort of an interesting quote and a contrast. I mean, Jeff Bezos was there talking about his space flight. And on the other hand, we have Sir Angle Whipps Jr., who's the president of Palau. And he told, when in his speech, he told a traditional story about a boy that they have, about a boy who ate too much. And ate so much that he ate all the resources on the island, and the islanders had to set him on fire. That's the story. But he continued that there's no dignity in a slow, painful death. And he called on other countries to bomb Palau now, instead of making them suffer. And he finished up by saying, leaders of the G20 were drowning, and our only hope is the life ring that you're holding. We must act now, and we must act together. And I think it just shows an incredible, contrast between the desperation of the people of the South who are being affected and, people like Jeff Bezos, who takes a little joy trip into space because he's got the money.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Jenny, and then
Yes,
John.
Following up my comment on Greta Thunberg and the fact that she has not been allowed to attend this very important meeting. Pete, do you know how can you tell us how the delegates are appointed? Who decides who should come and who should not come? How does it work? What will the results be? How will we know the results? Will there be I assume there's going to be a final report, but can you expand on that? What will happen after COP26 is all over? What
will happen after COP26 is over? Yeah, I would imagine that there would be a report on that. I guess what they're working up to is a series of commitments, and I guess then there's going to be the usual play of late night sessions and folk running from one group to another, and then signing on the dotted line of some documents in front of the world's cameras. So that will be it. There'll be a series of commitments that are signed. So there is pressure. There is that kind of pressure to that our leaders are going to be under. So yeah, not just another report, but there is an actual chance of actual action happening, which is why there's a large number of folk making their way up to Scotland every single day. Just is there any way that they can put the pressure on? It's hard to see what would really draw people, what really focus minds on actually making hard commitments, like, for example, closing existing oil coal mines, not opening new coal mines, not expanding gas or oil, the Cambio in the Shetland Islands. So it's been proposed. So Swedish activists and the New Scientists saying we should move beyond peaceful, non-violent disobedience into civil unrest, and we should start committing acts of vandalism, damage to infrastructure. This is what the pipeline activists on indigenous American land were doing. They were attacking pipelines directly. That kind of action and attention might actually force folk to take this seriously, but it's what's most likely to happen is that there's going to be a show, there's going to be a flash, there's going to be a bang, and we're going to be told it's all over, and nothing will have changed.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jenny, we're losing you.
how were the delegates appointed? Who decided who was going to go and who wasn't?
I'm sorry, I really don't know. No, sorry.
Right,
Thank you.
we should know really.
No, John.
Yeah.
Could I just make a comment about the economic side of things? Because I mean, this does involve people getting a new understanding and to a large extent changing their minds. I think what changed my mind very much in this direction was this book. If you'll have to read it in a mirror. But
Prosperity without growth.
Economics
For a finite planet.
planet.
Thank you. I've noted that.
Tim Jackson.
Thanks.
It's accessible. It's not over doing the academic side, but he's a professor, I think, at Surrey University on sustainable economy. And there are very reputable and hard, well thought out economic theories that are about. It's just that the dominant model and the money behind it prevents this getting a real grip. But I think we do need to get a grip of it.
Absolutely. Yes. Greta's put it succinctly, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
We still don't have the political will amongst political leaders. That still isn't the case. Yeah. Should we really have to? Yeah, well, we do really have to, and that message still hasn't gotten through. When you're hearing commitments, oh yeah, by 2030, by 2040, by 2050, you don't, it's on Netflix found, just flicking around, oh, Halloween, my God, that was a scary movie. On Halloween, it's a documentary about the 2008 financial crash. Really scary viewing, because you at every stage this disaster could have been averted, but it wasn't. Folk were raising the alarm bells, but they were being ignored, sidelined. The regulators were in on it. The government was in on it. The academics were in on it. The economics professors were in on it. So we have corruption at the very heart of economics. There's no such thing as as an economics professor at a top university that's only on a faculty salary. They're on boards of the big financial institutions. They're on boards of the big oil and gas institution. They are very well paid for their position. And what that money buys is it buys the predominant economic theory of our time.
We've got time for one more question. Anyone apart from Jenny? Sorry, Jenny, you're very welcome to ask it, but we'll double check that there's no other hands that were raised. Go ahead, Jenny.
It's not a question really. Can you hear me? It's a statement.
Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, go.
All right. Well, I don't know whether everybody knows, but, and Helen probably won't want me to say, but I'm going to say it, that she has plans to go to Glasgow, I think, at the weekend. And I'm sure she goes with all our very, very, very best wishes, and, good luck to Helen. But also, I guess you will be there as well.
Sorry, we're losing you, Jenny. We're losing you.
Pete, will you be there as well in Glasgow?
Unfortunately not. I've blown my time and money budget for climate activism and traveling up. I'm just doing what I can as a key.
Yeah, I'm sure you're doing lots and lots and lots of very important things wherever you are. So thank you very much for that, and good wishes, of course, from us all to Helen. Thank you, Helen.
you. Thank
Well,
you.
On that note, I think that's a very good point to end on. So Helen, all the very best. And Pete, thanks ever so much for leading the discussions this evening. You've given us a lot of food for thought. So thanks very much, everyone. And a round of applause. So the recording will be available on the Faringdon Peace Group homepage tomorrow, kind of around 10 o'clock-ish or so. So you can also send the link to other people. Anyway, thanks again, everyone, especially Pete.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Till the next time. Mm. Yeah.
Bye, Pete.
Yeah.